my pleasure to welcome Dr. Matthew Barrett to the stage this evening. His full biography is printed in the program, so I won't read it all again. But last spring, I invited Dr. Barrett to speak because I was compelled by his project of retrieving the theological contributions of the early church and medieval era. As a professional musician, I'm hopeful that his research will also will lead to a renewed interest in the worthy music and architecture from the pre-Reformation Christendom. I was always struck to read through Calvin's preface to the Genevan Psalter to see the references to Plato, and all through Luther's writing on music to see how much of a classical orientation our reformers had. And so I've asked Dr. Barrett to speak on that tonight. Our faculty and staff have benefited from his Credo podcast and articles, and I very much look forward to reading his book, Reformation as Renewal, which is quite impressive, but I'm going to have to wait until I'm not starting a college. So please welcome Dr. Matthew Barrett to our stage.
Thank you very much for that generous introduction. I can't tell you just how much I've been looking forward to this evening. Hearing is one thing, hearing about you, seeing you is quite another, especially around so many of the distinctives that were mentioned earlier, how rare that is. And that's really where I want to begin this evening. We are living in a day when universities are terminating their liberal arts education. It's no secret. The reasoning of these universities is, well, it's quite modern. These degrees are just not practical anymore. In fact, maybe they never were. No obvious job is waiting after graduation, nor do these jobs produce a tangible product, let alone one that is profitable. In our modern day, when success, and with it, even a person's value, must be quantified, the only question that matters is, why is that degree useful? Well, the collateral damage to the human person by now is quite conspicuous. When a college experience as a whole even, is reduced to a career or career skills, the success of which is only measured by its production, well then virtue, and with it the formation of the whole person, is no longer considered relevant. And with the absence of virtue, why live in wonder at that which is good, true, beautiful, and for no other reason that it is good, true, and beautiful? Each month, I host a gathering of students in my home, and I call it Anselm House, named after that first scholastic Anselm of Canterbury. After coffee and some delicious pie, if I have it my way, we sit down and we read out loud a classical text together. After listening to a voice from another world, we then participate in Socratic dialogue. At the end, we sing the doxology. That's it. I've often asked myself over the years, why in the world do these students keep coming back? After all, they've got lots of classes at their institution. They've got homework. Some of them are pastors with all kinds of ministerial responsibilities. They've got jobs, not to mention friends far cooler than a middle-aged man obsessed with old books. Well, after several years, I think I might know the answer. For 2 hours, nobody is telling them to be practical. Nobody is judging them by their performance on social media. Nobody is calculating their worth by their network potential. For but a brief evening, they do not have to be Martha, only Mary. Sit is what we say to them. Just sit, be still, and we give you permission to be lost in thought. Simply contemplate God, not because it's useful, but purely for the love of God. Simply because it's worth it in and of itself. And you know what happens? Like a child who puts out their arm and a butterfly lands on top of it. Suddenly, the rest of the world seems to vanish around them. All they want to do is stand there for hours, lost in wonder at the beauty of the butterfly. Moreover, they're not simply standing there alone. This is the beauty of it. By entering the depths of contemplation in community, virtue begins to penetrate into their very being as they enter through the gates of the good life, but they do so in friendship with others. Aristotle said, perfect friendship is the friendship of men who are good and alive in virtue. Now, I suspect that the launch of a college like this one is like discovering a hidden pearl at the bottom of the sea. Why? Because most students today will never encounter anything quite like it. Probably not due to a lack of opportunity, maybe, but more likely entirely due to their exchange of one love for another. In her book, Lost in Thought, The Hidden Treasures of the Intellectual Life, Zena Hitz observes that there are two kinds of basic restlessness: the love of learning versus the love of spectacle. She says the one sort, exemplified by Augustine's own journey, as he describes it in Confessions, unceasingly moves past the surfaces of things to what is more real. The second, by contrast, flees unceasingly from one object to another object, all on the same level, never culminating in anything further, never achieving anything beyond the thrill of experience. And then she says this: the love of learning always wants more. The love of spectacle is satisfied at the surface, while the love of learning is exercised by someone like Ambrose, who's in that famous painting, alone in his study, engrossed in reading. The love of spectacle seems to always be enmeshed in a crowd. It doesn't take a professor to spot the love of spectacle and the way it triumphs in our own day. Zena Hitz says it's the compulsive use of social media, for example. She calls it a screwed up longing for communion. Maybe you think she's being dramatic or overreacting. Well, my oldest daughter this year is a senior in high school. She's been fed a steady diet of the love of learning her whole life. But to participate in an internship that suddenly opened up to her, she had to enroll at the public high school. She came home from her first day of school just the other day, and of course she was greeted by a very curious dad, eager to see how she did, what she learned, what's ahead of her, what friends she made, what relationships could be formed. Dad, no one's alive. What do you mean? Well, I tried. I really tried. They won't even look up, Dad. Everyone's zoned in to their phones in class. And when the teacher tried to get to know them, asking what hobbies they enjoy, the student next to me raised his hand and said, "Does scrolling count?" My daughter, I could see it on her face. She felt numb. Like if she continues, nothing's real anymore. For where the love of learning is absent, that restlessness that plagued Augustine until he could rest in something real, well, there's no real community that can then follow. Now, my point is not to shame public schoolers. I was one of them. And I don't doubt that there are a variety of experiences to be had, some good ones. But my point, rather, is that for the first time in her life, my daughter was forced to really reckon with the love of learning or the love of spectacle, like she had not been before. Which one will she have? Or maybe, better put, which one will have her? Zena Hitz might as well be describing the fork in the road that my daughter knew just the other day when she says, in the supremely shallow realm of acting for the sake of acting and a preoccupation with spectacle, growth is impossible. All that lies there is an endless, repeated sequence of increasingly joyless thrills. Our sense of emptiness and lack of satisfaction are signs that we have not, in fact, attained any human goods or actually connected. Notice the irony, right? Actually connected with other human beings. The dissatisfaction is a sign that we long to attain real goods and that we long to bond with others in truth, in the depths, and not remain at the surface of things. This fork in the road is not unique to our day. As early as Book 2 of Plato's Republic, we are faced with a choice, with this question. Tell me, do you think there is a kind of good we welcome, not because we desire what comes from it, but because we welcome it for its own sake? Joy, for example, and all the harmless pleasures that have no results beyond the joy of just having them. That's it, isn't it? That is the very core of a classical education. If we desire the good not to use it, but actually for its own sake, then what is education but love's quest to learn? As Plato says, the love of learning is the same thing, and Aristotle would follow him in this way, essentially making the same remark. The love of learning is the same thing as philosophy or the love of wisdom. Now, before you run Plato through that modern box of education, remember that in the very next breath, he speaks of music. And not just music, poetry, literature. Might surprise you, he even talks about fiction. Stories from the imagination do not settle for just telling people what's good. They are so enduring, so penetrating, because they show us the good, displaying its embodied form, until its beauty actually shapes the student's soul. It's for this reason that G.K. Chesterton warns us the first use of good literature is that it prevents a man from being merely modern. To be merely modern is to condemn oneself to an ultimate narrowness. Have you ever noticed how similar Jesus is to Plato? Jesus puts before his students a story, the story of the Good Samaritan. Why? Because one of his students was so phony to think he could genuinely fulfill the commandment to love God while loving everything else except those who would cost him his reputation the most. This young student did not want to be good, but he merely wanted to appear good, to use it. Those of you who are faculty of New Aberdeen, if you commit your students to the classical way, so that your students love the good, not in some attempt to use it, but for the joy of the good itself, then they will not only love, but live the good life. They will live it. In the minds of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, the good life was not the affluence of mindless luxury or the sloth of perpetual hedonism, as it is for us today, because we confuse leisure for recreation. Rather, the good life was a quest to become the type of person who radiates virtue on the road to happiness, embodying virtues like prudence, temperance, justice, and fortitude. Just consider one, fortitude, from the perspective, though, of a student. But let's take a student, shall we, that is bred on the spectacle, the love of spectacle. Our day is not all that different from Aristotle's day, a day in which it's far more spectacular to be a sophist. A sophist looks at his peers, identifies that rhetoric which public opinion will favor, and then postures itself accordingly, as if a defender of the truth. In Book 11 of his Ethics, Aristotle calls this X, formerly known as Twitter. But seriously, every professor, if you're a professor here, you know what I'm going to say next, don't you? You feel the weight on your shoulders. As student after student defines courage not by recalling, say, the martyrdom of Socrates, the exile of Athanasius, the cutting out of his tongue, Maximus, the exile of a Calvin, and many others. No, courage is defined according to the latest 280 characters. If you think I'm being dramatic, I've watched students make life-altering choices as significant as changing traditions after watching a single YouTube video and personality with 500,000 views. Professors, I may just know what's going through your mind. How can I possibly instill courage in students embedded within a culture of online groupthink so dominant that it decides the fate of presidential candidates every 4 years? Philosopher Peter Crave has taught for decades and decades at the university level, knows your despair. In his book, Back to Virtue, he laments that sociology has socialized and collectivized morality. Consensus determines rightness or wrongness, and democracy becomes our religion. The voice of the people is the voice of God. But the state of education is more desperate still, I would argue. What professor could have imagined trying to instill virtues in a student population turning to ChatGPT to validate their psychological state or their pronouns? We are no longer anticipating Huxley's Brave New World. We are living in it. Yet Aristotle would ask, at what cost? Now, to some of you students, imagine if Aristotle taught your class this semester. I'm sorry, professors, you'll have to forgive me for setting a high bar. To live the good life, he would call on you to be brave. But bravery means your quest for truth, goodness, and beauty is not to be dictated by the consensus of the social media mob, nor is it decided, ironically enough, by the latest virtue signaling of those who declare themselves courageous. No, if you are to be a student with fortitude, says Aristotle, well, the student with fortitude feels and acts according to the merits of the case and in whatever way reason directs. The student with fortitude does not look to the democracy of the living, whoever happens to be alive, as G.K. Chesterton said, to decide what bravery shall be, as does, say, a sophist, but evaluates whether the end, the telos itself, is good, true, and beautiful. And with no little help from the democracy of the dead, as he calls it. As Aristotle himself says, it is for a noble end that the brave man endures and acts as courage directs. When the end is noble, the brave person, the brave student, will lay down their reputation, even their life if they must, while the coward will die only to escape such pain altogether. In the words of Aristotle, to die to escape from poverty or love or anything painful is not the mark of a brave man, but rather of a coward, for it is softness to fly from what is troublesome. And such a man endures death not because it is noble, but to fly from evil. As it turns out, Aristotle and Christ have much in common. Who would have thought? For if the end is noble, like saving a man who's been robbed, beaten, left for dead, then it is not the priest or the Levite who is brave, but the Samaritan. While the priest left the man for dead so that he could reach the synagogue where he had a class that day to instruct students in virtue, it was the Samaritan who put virtue into practice. Compassion proved the bridge to courage, mercy the gateway to fortitude. He left that day living the good life. Now, at the start, I said, New Aberdeen's recovery of the classical liberal arts is rare today. Like finding a glass of water while hiking through a desert. But I believe New Aberdeen is more unique still, for it's not only classical but reformed, as you just heard. What, though, does Athens have to do with Geneva? The Reformed confessions and catechisms are invaluable because the Christian sojourner on his or her way to that happy land of beatitude, well, that is a journey that demands not just any virtues, but theological virtues, faith, hope, and if the Apostle Paul were here, he would say, most of all, what? Love. Apart from which we cannot experience the vision of God. For our darkness, this very state of our darkness, is not merely ignorance, as if that alone can explain the vices we are so prone to, as Plato thought, but death, making the solution not merely knowledge, but life through the Word made flesh. Our depravity requires not only illumination, but regeneration for these theological virtues. And this way, the good life and all the happiness it brings takes on additional significance, doesn't it? The Reformed scholastics of the 16th and 17th and even 18th centuries, oftentimes relying on Aquinas before them, taught their students to pray, to get on their knees and to pray and to ask the Holy Spirit, infuse those precious virtues within me, Lord, so that I might be consecrated and conformed into the image of Christ. Make me a good tree. That's the prayer. Not in order to be justified, but because they had been justified. For they knew, as Jesus said, a tree is not a good tree if it does not bear fruit. A reformed institution, like this one, is like that glass of water in the desert, because the road to the good life is paved by the presence of the Spirit. Aristotle was right. He was right to say happiness is God-given in his ethics. But the Heidelberg Catechism is right to add that it is the Holy Spirit who is given to me to make me, by true faith, a partaker of Christ and all of his benefits. All of them. Students, with Aristotle, don't let this secular, disenchanted age, as it's been called, tell you the good life is anything but God-given. But with Heidelberg, never forget the gift of the good life is the Spirit, given to you by the love of the Father through the grace of his Son. And faculty, how then will you educate them? There is no doubt a fundamentalism out there that is easy. It would have you believe that the past is irrelevant to the future. Fundamentalism sees a jungle and shoots dead its exotic animals, all because they heard somewhere that there's creatures in the wild that are dangerous. Fundamentalism proudly waves the flag of faithfulness, but it does so on the very tractor cutting down the forest. But you have a different opportunity in front of you. The entire future of this school is ahead of you. What will it be? The one school that you are sending students to, parents, what will it be? Not do, but be. Let me tell you, the day we live in is not so much a jungle anymore, it's a desert. And I think we all would do well to listen to C.S. Lewis when he said in The Abolition of Man, the task of the modern educator, that's many of you, and not just the professors here, but many of you parents, because it begins in the home. The task of the modern educator is not to cut down jungles, but to irrigate deserts. The great tradition stands behind you and before you. Open its deep wells, and do so not just for yourself, but right in front of your students. Open those wells for them. Be liberal. That is, open those ancient wells to your students so they may drink, and like Augustine, be satisfied. Thank you very much.